Hello and welcome to this third video in this little series on TPI psychometrics. In the first video, I talked about the behavioral model DISC, how we like to do things, how we interact with the world. And in the second video, I talked about driving forces, our motivators, what engages and disengages us, what initiates action, what moves us into action. In this third video, I want to talk about competencies. So behaviors DISC was about how we do things. Motivators, driving forces was about why we do what we do. And this competencies, we call them DNA, is about what skills you've learned and mastered that modify behaviors and add value to your innate skills, if you wish. You'll see here that I've already populated the sheet with the 25 competencies that TTI have developed, identified, if you wish, over the last 30 years. And these are competencies that typically are required for most jobs. And a couple of comments on them. They're there, you can see in alphabetical order. The first thing is that typically high performers will have somewhere in the order of 18 out of the 25, they will score above average. Second thing is, in most roles, we're typically looking at the top 7 competencies. So in behaviors, we typically look at the top 4 behavioral factors. So that DISC, that translates into 12 behavioral factors, such as competitiveness and so on. And we typically look at the top 4 of those. We typically look at the top 4 driving forces, what we call the primary driving force cluster. And we typically look at the top 7 competencies for a role. You'll also notice on the 25 competencies I've marked down there, I've dots beside 5 of them, and I'm going to come back to those in just a moment. So my first comment on competencies is it's a skill, it's what you have learned. And I want to just relate this for a moment to EQ, which I'll be talking about in the next video. EQ, emotional intelligence, is a learned skill. And I'm going to give you a simple example of that. If you look at these competencies, you'll see there, for example, customer focus, employee development and coaching, influencing others, interpersonal skills, leadership, personal accountability, self-starting, resilience, teamwork, understanding others. These are all skills that we associate with emotional intelligence. These are learned skills. I want to make this point. I think a really, really important point for when I come to the next video talking about emotional intelligence. So these are learned skills. And what I'm arguing here too is that you can go out and you can upgrade yourself. You can upgrade yourself vis-a-vis what's required for a specific role, or just upgrade yourself in general. You can go and you can learn these. And the way you learn them is by practicing them, understanding what it is, and then practicing, developing techniques, tactics, strategies to allow you to practice these, because practice makes permanent. And if you practice new ways of doing things, if you develop these new skills, they will become permanent ways of behaving. And ultimately, what we're talking about in all of these exercises, what do people experience? How do you behave in the world? How do you interact with the world? When I meet you, what do you experience when you meet me? What do I experience when I meet you? It all translates into action and behaviors at the end of the day. So, and looking at these, we have 25 competencies. As I said, typically high performers score above average in 18 of the 25, and typically we look at 7 for a particular role. But I want to talk here for a moment about leadership competencies, because most of the people listening in on this video, and most of the people that we work with, are talking about leadership development at whatever level. When I talk about leadership development, I'm not talking about the C-suite. I'm talking about leadership as a concept, the development of leadership in an individual. And the key, according to Ron Price in The Complete Leader, there are 5 core leadership competencies. And they are as follows. So the first one he talks about is self-management. And when he talks about self-management, what he says here is the ability to demonstrate self-control and manage time and priorities appropriately. So you see down here, time and priority management. I've also highlighted personal accountability and interpersonal skills, influencing other, and goal orientation. So the self-control and time priority management is part of it. Personal accountability is part of it, I think. And we come back to those in a moment. He says a person who has mastered the skill of self-management is adept at working independently in order to pursue business objectives. The second characteristic that Ron Price in The Complete Leader said is a key characteristic of leadership is personal accountability. Now, he defines personal accountability as a willingness and ability to take personal responsibility for processes, decisions, actions, and results created by you. Personal accountability is about recognizing that you are responsible for what's happening in your world, even when you're not responsible. It's taking ownership of what's happening so that you can actually do something about it. It sets the scene for how everybody else acts. And I actually think that personal accountability, I'm just going to put sort of an asterisk here beside it, because for me, personal accountability is a foundational competency for any individual and for any organization. And I think it's the most important competency that a leader can display to other team members in terms of developing a culture. The third characteristic that Ron Price identifies as being leadership competency is goal achievement. Now, you'll notice that it's goal achievement, whereas down below in the list we've goal orientation. And he differs a little bit from this. He makes the argument that it's not just about being orientated towards goals. It's not even just about the ability to set goals. It's about the ability to set and achieve the goals. So he said the ability to execute a plan and get the desired results. And the fourth competency that he defines as being critical for leadership, interpersonal skills. And again, in The Complete Leader, they define interpersonal skills as the ability to effectively communicate with others, build rapport, and relate to different people from different backgrounds and different personality styles. So it's your ability to flex, to stretch, and relate to and communicate with other people. And again, you can see this in emotional intelligence competence, as are all of these. I'm quite convinced these are all emotional intelligence competencies. And the fifth competency that Ron Price, The Complete Leader, identifies is the ability to persuasion. And you see on the list down below, it's called influencing others, but he calls it persuasion. Ron Price defines this as the ability to convince others to change, be it their actions, opinions, behaviors, or decisions. And if you stop and think about this for a moment, it's very hard to lead people if you don't have the capacity to influence them, if you're not persuasive, if you can't get them to get on board a vision or get on board a plan or follow the leader. So believe in what you stand for example. So these are the top 5 characteristics of leadership and top 5 competencies. And I suppose I'm using them as an example because they are in many ways all EQ competencies, and they can all be developed. And this is really, really important to realize that we're not fixed. We can develop, we can grow. We can say that our behavioral profile and even our driving forces are pretty fixed. They tend not to change much over time. However, we can adapt. So the capacity to flex and adapt, to relate to people, to change our habits, to change the way we view things, for example, personal accountability, self-management, goal achievement. We can actually develop these skills and form new habits. So competence for me is a really, really interesting area. Now, the last comment I want to make of competencies is when we look at comparing people to roles, and we talk about a role requires certain behavioral profile, certain driving forces, and certain competencies. And we produce a development plan. So we compare an individual to a role, and we've got the gap report and compare a development plan for somebody so they become superior performer, i.e. that they match the requirements of the role very, very carefully. And where there are gaps, that we develop them so they upskill, if you wish, to match the requirements of a role. A main area of focus for me is competencies. We can talk about developing behaviors, we can talk about developing driving forces, but really and truly, the area I tend to focus on is developing competencies and using those competencies to modify behaviors. So I want you to think of the model. I'll just draw this for you very, very quickly. I want you to think of the model as follows. That we have how, and that is DISC. How do we do what we do? How do we engage with the world? how do we communicate, and so on and so forth. We have why, and this is driving forces, our motivators. Why do we do what we do? And these are initiators. These initiate action. So driving forces are why, initiates our how, the action that we take. And the third one is what, and this is our DNA, our competencies. And these modify our behaviors. So these three work very, very well together. We look at how does one do what one does, why does one do what one does, and what skills has one learned that can modify and allow one to adapt and develop. Underpinning this, we have the next one that I'll be looking at with you, EQ. And what we're asking there in EQ is, am I active in a particular area? Am I actively practicing self-awareness? Am I actively practicing self-regulation, social awareness and social regulation? This is the foundation that underpins the other three sciences. And the last one we look at in this series is axiology. ACI, Acumen Capacity Index. And what we're looking at there is, what potential do I have? How clearly do I see myself in the world, and what potential do I have? So that's competencies for you, and the model, the competency model explained, and particularly competence around the area of leadership and leadership development. So I hope you found that helpful. That was a third video in this little mini series, like building the models and explaining where they come from and how they work. In the next video, we will look at emotional intelligence, and I look forward to seeing you for that video. Thank you.